If you or someone you know struggles with addiction, stay right here for the Recovery Boys. Lewis Finch and Macon Moy discuss alcoholism, drug addiction, co-occurring disorders, and life in recovery. And now, here's Lewis and Macon.
I'm Macon.
And I'm Lewis.
And we're the Recovery Boys. So this week, as we told you guys when we started the Recovery Boys podcast back, we were going to bring some guests in, and that's exactly what we've done today, and I'll let Lewis introduce them. But I did want to talk a little bit about how busy we have continued to be. And that's one of the things we'll talk with our guest about is what's going on. I think that, knock on wood, I think maybe we're at the end of this COVID nightmare, or at least I think we're getting ready to go to a new chapter. I don't think it'll ever completely be over, but I think that we're starting to realize that we're going to have to figure out how to live with this thing, not fundamentally change the way we do things.
Well, it's not going to, in the end, it's not going to affect alcoholics and addicts.
They're
not going to slow down because of it, and it's actually they're going to step up.
I was going to say,
foot in the gas.
I think if it's done nothing else, it's probably increased those numbers, and it's certainly given them permission to do things that they didn't have permission to do because all this isolation was something that was required.
Right.
And alcoholics and drug addicts love a dark place where they can go and do what they want and not get caught.
It's a perfect breeding ground.
Yeah, and so I think that and we were talking about this earlier, I think over the next few years, we're going to see an increased number, not just substance abuse issues, but also the mental illness issues that go with it hand in hand. And we're starting to see, I know just my wife and I, some of the other work we do, we're seeing more and more primary mental illness with a secondary substance abuse, and it used to be just the opposite. It used to be just the opposite. And so I think that it's going to really be interesting to see as we come out of this thing, the masks disappear and people kind of go back. I mean, even if you go into stores now, when I was driving in this morning, you stop, people wearing a mask stand out now. Used to, the person who didn't wear the mask was standing out.
Right.
Now the people who actually wear the mask are standing out. And I thought that was interesting.
And where their facility is located is they've been open a whole lot longer than most of the rest of the country has been. So that's kind of a segue, as they say.
Well, Lewis, why don't you introduce our guests?
Okay. So these two gentlemen, I'm going to do it in a particular order. This is Ryan Mitchell to my right, your left. I think that's the way it works, right?
Who knows?
And then, who knows? And then to my left, your right, is Eric Rhodes. Now, the way that I have come to know these guys, and Megan, I know you haven't, this is the first time you've met them, I believe. Well, you've met Eric before.
I have, yeah.
Ryan, I had heard about Ryan years ago when he had his own facility up in Nashville, right? Oak Tree Recovery.
Yes.
But I'd never met you when you were involved in Oak Tree, ironically. I met one of your understudies, I think, young man. So I was always fascinated. And for some reason, I thought you were a lot older, by the way, just for the record. He's a young'un. And I had heard about Eric when we first went into business. Because Farley Center, where you used to be, give them a free plug.
Yep.
All right, which does very good work too. You were kind of the grand master of that facility, and you'd been in the business a long time. You were one of those folks, and I've said this about. There are a handful of guys that when I got in here, I was told that's who you need to meet, because you've been in the space for so long, and your reputation, particularly with who you were associated with, carries a lot of weight, right?
Yeah.
And one of the first places that we went to, I think it was in the first few months we were open, was where you were. I met you and the medical director, I believe,
Yep.
and that's how you and I got to know one another.
Yeah.
These gentlemen are now with Lakeview Health, and they're going to go into much more detail on this, but a facility that I'm very familiar with because of my background with Willingway 7-8 years ago. Willingway is located in South Georgia. Lakeview's in North Florida, about 2.5-3 hours from them. And we, ironically, would, from time to time, swap referrals.
Yeah.
Folks who were not good fits for those guys would come up to us and vice versa. But they've run Lakeview is one of those programs that you can always count on to deliver at a higher level than you would expect, particularly, ironically, in the state of North Carolina. And we've got very few facilities here that, as Macon and I talk about all the time, that we would refer to. You guys are one of those facilities. So with that being said, again, Eric, thanks for coming. Ryan, thanks for coming. I just want to start out by kind of, if you would please, and you guys can battle over this, kind of give everyone an idea of what Lakeview is like, and then what I want to do is I want to follow up with some of the observations I know about you guys. So Eric, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So, thanks you guys
Sure.
for having us on. Lakeview's had a long history. We're over 20 years in business now, and it's been quite an evolution. The most recent additions is the separation of the genders. We've got a facility. We have 3 business units on campus, but the 2 main business units that do the high acuity is the Rose and the Star, and so we treat men and women separately. It's intentional. The genders were separated back in 2016, and it's not just that we had the expansion and we separated the buildings. The intentionality of the work that we do is really built in the content of the programming. So I think when we talk and when Lewis talks about how we take a high medical acuity, or we work with a dually diagnosed patients, it's rooted in the fact that we treat men and women separately, and we do it in an intentional way. So Ryan had the opportunity last night to kind of go through, the physical nature of the property and how, how we've put certain aspects of the programming in place. And our new CEO, who started with Lakeview in her early career as a counselor, was able to continue to just make observations about what she saw in treatment, what worked, what didn't work, and over time we've built that into the program. So we use Stephanie Covington and Dan Griffin's model in treating the men and the women. The domains are the same. So, identity and self, relationship, spirituality, all of those things are built in, but they're very different when you look at what the content of the programming is.
So, Eric, I'm going to follow up on that because
Yeah.
people don't understand why you tend to want to separate the genders.
Yeah.
And it basically boils down to men and women tend to focus on anything other than their recovery.
For sure.
And that the sexual component can
Right.
get in the way of that.
Right.
So even though you've got males and females at the facility, and you've got a 160-bed facility.
Right.
What was it? It was like 75
Yeah.
male beds and
78 and 54.
78, 54.
Yeah.
So you've got a large number of beds on both. The ability for people not to focus on what they're there
Yeah,
for
right.
exists, and that's why you do it. It's not to punish them; it's to force them into that
Sure.
space.
Sure.
And then before we get too far, I just want to, again, I don't know that I did a good enough job of this, but what I want everybody to understand is that Lakeview Health is a residential treatment program
Right.
versus Wellwyn, which is an outpatient treatment
Right,
program.
right.
You guys, because of the level of acuity that people present to you guys treat people at with a much higher degree of what's the word I'm looking for, Macon? When they're just
Sick.
they're much higher. That's the technical term we use. Yes, that's the medical. But your folks tend to be much sicker than the ones we see because you've got a medical component to it,
We do, yeah.
and you have a clinical component to
Correct.
it, which is key
Yeah.
to getting these people stabilized.
Yeah.
Because they're only going to be with you for a short period of time.
Right. Right.
So kind of on the back of that,
Yeah.
I know that and you came from that background too. You came from residential treatment
Yeah.
background. Ryan, your background kind of sets you up for the long-term issue. Because your folks at your old program were there for a fairly long period of time, right?
Yeah.
Lakeview can accommodate some of that too, right? It's not just a 30 days one and done, right?
Right. We can do a longer length of stay, and typically patients who come to us who have some co-occurring mental health issues, or they're a dual diagnosis patient, there's something going on other than just substance abuse. It could even be a medical complexity. We work with patients with chronic liver disease, pancreatitis, wet brain, alcohol-induced dementia, all sorts of things that come along with substance use or not. And so Typically with those patients, we can do a longer length of stay. Most patients are going to do between 30 and 45 days with us, and then are discharged with a pretty strong aftercare plan to return back home or wherever they're going to be. And then we connect them with services like well and outpatient, sober living, psychiatrists for med management, a nutritionist. Maybe a patient has a eating disorder component too, and they need to see a nutritionist or a trauma therapist. So while they're with us, we're not just focused on the time that we have them, but rather how to help them chart that path forward and exactly what do they need to continue this. And like Lewis said, my background is in aftercare. So for 7 years, I was getting patients from Lakeview and other treatment centers once they completed residential, and then they would come and stay with me for 3 to 6 months, some up to a year. I myself follow that path. I believe fully in a long continuum of care. For me, I think that first year in recovery is, there's a lot of danger of relapse and slip and return to use. So to have safe supported living, to have clinical support, to have a 12-step fellowship or a similar support group, a network of other people in recovery, all those things come together to give people the best possible outcomes and chance at long-term sobriety. And then if there is a return to use, then we as professionals step back in and figure out what the best path of correction is. A lot of times those patients will return to somewhere like Lakeview for another 30 days or maybe a shorter length of stay, and then come back to Lewis. So there is a recycling through the system sometimes when there's a return to use. But one thing that I've always loved about Wellwyn is they're very eager to collaborate. There are plenty of patients and clients for all of us to work with. So there really shouldn't be any competition there. It's just a matter of finding the best fit, and this patient's going to come to us for 45 days, and they're going to come to Wellwyn for another 3 months of outpatient, and then they're going to see a therapist, for the rest of that first year. So
you did bring up something that I would think we need to clarify, because the terms co-occurring and has been thrown out there, because I think for those that aren't in the field, those terms don't really have a meaning. And basically it incorporates the mental health aspects, right?
Does, yeah.
Because no one just has the addiction part. That's the symptom
Right.
of what is going on behind. Macon and I are good examples of that. We each had our own issues. That's why we drank into drugs.
Me too.
So,
Absolutely.
so I think that's critical that you guys can address. We often say it's easy to stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to stop using drugs. I did it thousands of times.
Oh, yeah.
I just didn't stop permanently.
Yes.
And it was because I never addressed what was behind that issue.
Absolutely.
And you guys have such a high acuity. Plus, you've got tracks. You have one track specifically, I believe, for athletes, right?
We work with.
You work with.
Yeah, we work
okay.
with a lot of retired professional athletes.
Okay.
Actually.
And because of I like to say it's because a lot of those folks, a lot of our folks, come in being really, really good at one thing, or being good as a working professional, or let's say an athlete, you're really, really good at a sport. Macon was a professional golfer really, until he got hurt, which led him down that path. And Macon, you kind of can speak to that.
Yeah, well, I was, it's interesting. I was a good athlete, played baseball in college. But one of the things that I discovered after, going through what I went through, I enjoyed, I got a lot of attention, but when I got the attention, it made me uncomfortable. So it was a real paradox for me. I was a good athlete, so I was always going to be covered, and, I was, people wanted to talk to me, people wanted to be around you because you're a good athlete, and it made me uncomfortable until I had that first drink, and then all of a sudden I was perfectly okay being the center of attention. As a matter of fact, I created a whole world around alcohol and drugs, and I think that's what happens. But Lewis, one of the things I definitely want, so you guys, one of the things that we're trying to accomplish with this podcast is to educate people. Mm-hmm. And so Lewis does a really good job. I've heard him when we do some of our intervention work, because most people that come to us don't know what to do. Right. They don't know where they are, they don't know what to do. They are at a loss, and as we say all the time, they're completely ill-equipped to handle the problem they're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And so, Lewis, explain to everybody exactly the levels of care, because these guys are at the top of the food chain.
Correct.
And so explain it to them so that if you're sitting here and you've got somebody that you think might need some help, trying to figure out where they belong is a real challenge. It's a real challenge, and we in the space probably do a poor job of trying to educate people about this is what, because people think, well, can I just come to you? Well, sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. It really depends on what we're dealing with.
Right.
So talk about those levels of care.
So the levels of care, and I think I've either 6 or 7 levels, and we'll talk about it, and I'll figure it out while we talk. But the highest level of care, the most acute level of care is detox, which is one of the services you guys provide.
Correct.
And it's critical because, most people don't understand this. They hear about the opioid situation and how dangerous it is to be on those drugs. Of course it is. But there's actually, from what I understand, there's no real protocol for detoxing off opiates. I mean, there's a way to do it, but it isn't like because it basically it's time, hydration, and vitamins, I guess, and they can give you stuff to make the pain lessen. But alcohol is one of those things that can kill you if you try to do it on your own. What I've been told, and I wasn't an opiate user like you were,
Like me, yeah.
like him. Yeah. But it's one of those things where if you're detoxing off opiates, you feel like you wish you were dead. It just won't kill you. Alcohol can actually kill you. So the top of the food chain from that standpoint is detox. Then it rolls into residential treatment, which is also what you guys do. A step prior to that or after that is partial hospitalization, which is, I refer to it as residential treatment, but you're living in your own house because you really can't hold a job down. You're going to treatment 5 to 6 days a week,
Right.
Probably up to 4 to 5 hours a day, but it's a little less intrusive in that you get to stay at home. And the level behind that is intensive outpatient, which is we provide. Then the step behind that is outpatient, which is what we also provide. We refer to it as continuing care. And then the step below that, I believe, is just individual therapy. So between the two of us, we cover the entire spectrum, which if you don't know what you're doing, and we have people all the time who come in here, they go, I don't want to go off somewhere for 30 days. And we try to explain to them, that's not really your call. Right. I mean, it is in the sense of you don't have to do what we suggest, but
Right.
It would be unethical and almost immoral for me to take somebody in who just simply isn't a fit from that standpoint. Culturally, they're gonna ruin whatever groups they're in because they're gonna come in high or drunk. Plus, something bad could happen to them.
Well,
that's why the key is to partner with people like you guys.
Yeah, and typically when we see those people, they haven't given up yet. Yeah. They still hold the illusion that I had this one guy say to me last week, oh, is there any possibility for me to have a friendly relationship with alcohol? And I was like, well, so far, how's that worked out for you? I'm not sure that a friendly relationship is in your future, but we do have a lot of guys who show up here because, we have, a fair number of executives who don't want to give up control yet. And that's, as we all know, that's the first step, is admitting you got a problem and asking for help. Right. And so that's one of those conversations that we have all the time.
Very much so. I also want to ask you guys, so you kind of give us the process for someone who is identified as needing your services. How does it work? Who do they interact with? And kind of take us through the process for you guys.
Yeah.
Right?
That's me. I'm one of the community-based reps for Lakeview Health. So I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, about 2.5 hours from here, and I cover the eastern part of this state in Charlotte and some of South Carolina. But my job is to be out in the community, building relationships with other providers like Lewis and Macon and Wellwyn, other doctors, therapists, sober livings, all the people that are sort of in this sphere of recovery and work in that continuum, so that it's kind of a twofold thing. If they have a patient who's a good fit for Lakeview, it's my job to work with that patient, their family, their therapist, whoever's involved currently, to get them safely down for treatment at Lakeview. If they're not a good fit for us, another part of my job is to help find a good fit that is. So I kind of leverage those relationships in a lot of ways. So if someone comes to me, they don't need detox, or maybe they just completed, maybe I refer them directly to Wellwyn for treatment. Or maybe they go to a different treatment center if they can't come to us. But then on the back end, when those patients finish with us, like I mentioned before, the aftercare piece, I'll come back and help on the back end, set them up with what they need here. So there are people like me that work for all treatment centers. There are independent people who work as treatment placement specialists, and it's kind of funny to me that I do this now, because back in the day, 2007, I think, was the first time I ever really wanted help for my issues, and I didn't know where to turn. So I'd been on a drinking binge. I went drunk to the emergency room in Atlanta and ran my mouth and ended up on a psych hold, and then I got out and didn't know what to do still. So I drank for another 5 years. And then finally went to residential treatment in 2012. But yeah, that's, and as far as us specifically, I'll get a call from a patient's family, from Lewis or another referral source. And I just kind of guide them through that process. I talk to them about Lakeview, but I always share part of my own personal experience. I tell you what, I can get more cooperation from a fellow addict or alcoholic if I tell them what I've done rather than telling them what they need to do. That worked for me. It's a good trick there. But yeah, so I'm there to help answer their questions, ease their fears, make the transition as smooth as possible, and get them where they need to be to start getting better.
Well, and you touched on what Macon was talking about. The education piece is sorely lacking, particularly if they do go to hospitals. What I refer to are public facilities, like hospitals, are not equipped to handle what we deal with. Theirs is, as Macon will call it, crisis management. These are folks who they feel like they're going to die, or they're in serious danger of something really bad happening to them. And the folks that are triaging them, all they want to do is get them stabilized, and then they want to take them somewhere. So a lot of times we will get those calls from hospitals because they recognize that we're the next step in the process. Sometimes they don't get those calls; they just release them, and it does to your point, it just perpetuates the situation and actually makes it worse, because you get a little sober time underneath you, and I can do this. Look, I feel good.
Right.
Yeah, that's the danger of 5 days of not using when you're an alcoholic or a drug addict. You all of a sudden feel better. It's like, I got this.
Yeah.
And then the next time you dive back in, it's a little bit deeper, and it continues. We deal with it all the time. And the other thing, especially about the hospitals, they are overworked, especially with this COVID thing, and so they just don't have any time. And it's not that they don't care about the people, but they're trying to get them in and out as soon as possible because the next person's getting ready to come in. So you really can't blame them for their job is not to educate people, is to get them evened out and move them on to the next step. Especially for whatever reason in this particular market, it's particularly bad. It's a hard place to go and get a good detox. It just really is. And we struggle with that. That's the reason that we call you guys.
Yeah.
At least we know if we call you and we
Very
send
much
somebody
so.
down there, we know exactly what's going to happen. If we send them to the local place here, it literally depends on who they interact with.
Yeah.
There's not a system there. It's the people they deal with. And we've had horror stories, And as to your point, right? I mean, when they leave and it didn't work, they figure, well, they'll go back to what they know how to do, which is drinking and drugging.
And I think it's also important, too, to share that there's also, whether it's talking to a patient directly or working with a family member who has a patient they're trying to assist, there's this, window of willingness where a person is willing to do something different. They've gotten in enough pain. They're like, okay, I'll do whatever I have to do to get out of this. That changes quickly.
Yeah,
they start
it does.
feeling a little better, and they're like, nah, I don't need that. And then, obviously, there's danger of return to use and overdose and death. It's a very dangerous situation. So we as professionals, and me as a person in recovery myself, I know that if someone says they're willing to go to treatment, we work very quickly to get them there. I've seen people change their mind, and then they might come back 3 months later and be ready again, and we get them in that time, but they might not make it.
Well,
back.
that's the point.
Yeah.
They may change their mind,
So
but maybe too
if
late.
someone says that they're willing to do it, get them there.
So what, we talked a little bit, by the way, last night we had a networking event that Lakeview helped sponsor. And we had a number of working professionals in the area that came to it. And we saw this remarkable video that you guys had produced, which was absolutely mind-blowing from my standpoint. Tell everyone, give everyone an idea of the differences between or at least what you offer, and then we can kind of weave in the differences. 'Cause I think there's some significant differences between what Lakeview offers and what is out there to the typical treatment center. So walk people kind of through that.
Sure. So I think, you know, probably the most significant offerings are going to be, you know, the high levels of care. So the inpatient, the detox component, with a heavy emphasis on medical. So we can navigate some medical supports. We talked a little bit about the hospitals, our hand in glove use. You know, Ryan working locally, a lot of times an individual has a consequence associated with the use that gets them in that position. So
Like a legal issue.
a legal issue,
Right.
a medical issue, you know,
That's a good point.
Ends up, you know, in the hospital for whatever medical component, but then that was the precipitating factor, was really the use. And so we can navigate that. We're quick, so typically we can get an assessment done, usually on the phone. If it is a more medical acuity, we'll have, you know, some physician interaction, and really then it just becomes logistics, getting somebody from point A to point B. We intake 24/7. We're staffed in a way that allows us, you know, to really put the patient at the forefront of the treatment and make them comfortable at that point. So I think, you know, from a medical and psychiatric acuity perspective, we can help some pretty complicated patients. We talked a little bit about the gender specific already, and I think from that perspective, you know, I'm an ACOA guy. You know, I grew up, we're probably very similar in age, you know. Folks,
I'm much older.
folks,
Trust me. I'm much
He just
older.
ages well.
Wait till after lunch.
Lewis is like fine wine. The older he gets, the better he is. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing up wine, by the way. Appreciate that.
But I think a lot of folks, you know, go through multiple treatments and never get to the root cause of the use, and a lot of times that's because not feeling comfortable going to the dark place that they need to go to.
Yeah.
You know, when we separated the genders, we were fascinated by the fellowship that the guys had, the ability to get vulnerable with each other. That was not happening in mixed groups. So our ability to really kind of you know, get to those underlying issues, that's a place where we excel. And then we have a few of the specialty programs. So we have a chronic pain program. It's
Now explain that, because I don't think people. I think people don't really understand why that's so critical from a addiction standpoint.
right. So chronic pain is any pain that lasts for longer than 6 months. So an individual may have an injury, a car accident, and that acute pain lasts over time, prescribed narcotics for the treatment of that pain, and that develops into an addiction. But the pain for them is real. So it's usually tied to a diagnosis. It could be osteoarthritis, fibromyalgia, neuropathic pain, migraine. These are all diagnoses that people have to live with for the rest of their lives.
Sure.
But they don't necessarily have to live with the narcotics. And so taking a look at what that looks like, what the quality of what life looks like, managing that pain scale, we've been really successful at getting folks off of addictive and euphoric medications and giving them a good quality of life.
Well, and it's interesting though that you rarely hear that side of the story.
Yeah.
You all hear I'm in pain, so where's the pill for it?
Right. That's right.
When in reality, the pill metaphorically is having a skill set where you can deal with the pain.
Absolutely. I think too that it's an interesting patient type that struggles with chronic pain because they're most likely coming to us because there's an opiate addiction involved. And I worked with young men previously in the aftercare setting, and so many of them were high school athletes that got injured and were first introduced to pain medication, and then that little light bulb went off, and they're like, "This is what works for me," and then abuse sets in, and then they get there. But you know, there's a lot of issues that need to be processed because you have an opiate addict with chronic pain. People are gonna challenge that.
Sure.
They're gonna try to invalidate that pain, and that's frustrating to the patient because that pain is legitimate. They do need help with it. Our position is that there are other ways to manage that. And on our campus, we have a 10,000 square foot wellness center. It's staffed with personal trainers. It's staffed with physical therapists.
Now, wait a minute, how big is the facility?
10,000 square feet.
So I told you 4 to 5. Having gone to the facility, said this to you guys last night, that was one of the most impressive physical visuals I've ever seen. And I got to tell you, to me, what it says is the mind and the body work in concert with one another. And you guys believe in that.
We absolutely do. And for me, physical fitness is a big part of my recovery journey too. It's not for everyone, but for some it's very important. But all patients have access to that daily, and it's important. But in active addiction, we're not taking care of ourselves, and so learning those self-care practices, feeling better about yourself, But one thing I love is we have the beautiful facility, but our trainers in the wellness center are part of our clinical team. So they're staffing with therapists. They're looking for obsessive behaviors, over-exercising. There are no mirrors or scales in that facility. We want to ask patients questions like, how are you feeling? Are you sleeping better at night? Are your clothes fitting you better? And looking at different ways to gauge progress with exercise than weight or mirrors. But yeah, back to pain recovery, we have a yoga studio and yoga instructor. So, yoga, flexibility, strength training, physical therapy, anti-inflammatory diet. We're giving these patients a new set of lifestyle choices that can help reduce that pain long term. And if they leave a place like Lakeview and continue that, then the goal is their pain to be, at a level that can be managed with non-narcotic medications.
Right.
So I think we do a good job of that. There are not a lot of people doing that, but that's a certain patient type that I think desperately needs help and slips through the cracks, because if you don't help their pain, they're going to return to use.
Well, and you talk about the chronic pain issues. It kind of the fentanyl issue that's been driving the opioid deaths lately, I guess, came from that direction. But used properly, fentanyl is a good drug if you're using it properly. It's a chronic pain drug for people who, but you got to use it right. You put it in the hands of an opiate addict or alcoholic, and it's deadly. Because as Macon points out, if one pill is good, 2 are going to be twice as good.
Amen.
Right?
Amen.
So,
plus, you talking about the chronic pain, that was my issue. I was a baseball player, and then I was a golfer. I walked a bunch, had knee problems. The first time that, it wasn't purposeful, but it just happened, that I mixed a Vicodin with a vodka. I was like, ooh, got this figured out, no problem. And it led to almost 15-year addiction to opiates. The chronic pain became an excuse. It wasn't a problem. It was a vehicle for me to get high, quite honestly. And I felt so bad. I mean, at the start, and I'm sure you guys have seen this, at the start, getting opiates was pretty simple. You didn't even have to doctor shop. You could just go in and say, hey, I'm doing this, and what's your pain? What's the scale? 10. Well, of course it's 10. 12.
Right.
What does it need to be?
Turn it up.
Yeah. What does it need to be? Just throw me the prescription pad. I'll write my own prescription out. But towards the end, it really did get to be complicated. And of course, the chronic pain I don't know if I had it or not, because I was getting dope sick. The chronic pain was a dope sick, and so it's a nasty thing that happens. And it's good that so many people in the space now have experienced it, because we can recognize it. And I think that finding people who really want to get off of opiates is, there's a lot of people out there that are sick and tired of that kind of life. And it's also, it's gotten to be more difficult to get them. It's more expensive if you're buying them on the street. And then you introduce this fentanyl thing where you can die from taking a pill. It gets to be really complicated.
For sure.
And so there's a tremendous need, but the number of opiate addicts out there, they're thick. They're in the woods, and they're still using. And the fact that they're buying stuff off the street, I was telling Lewis, and I don't know if you guys have seen this, but cocaine's made a huge comeback. You can walk into the nice restaurants in New York or Boston or whatever, and there are guys in there doing bumps again. It's like, whoa. That was 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
You guys not keeping up with, if you get the wrong batch, you can have one little bump and drop dead.
And what's scaring the hell out of me these days is, it kind of started with these pills that you buy on the street that ended up being whatever, flour and baby aspirin with a sprinkle of fentanyl, and they're calling it OxyContin or something. And it does get you high and you get the effect, but fentanyl is so strong, it takes such a tiny amount. Any deviance or mismeasurement can lead to overdose and death. So that was bad enough, but now, they're putting fentanyl in lower quality drugs across the spectrum. So you just mentioned cocaine, which was
Right.
one of my drugs of choice. We're finding heroin. We're finding fentanyl in cocaine now.
Right.
Which,
Which
have
is-
completely
Which is
opposite
totally,
effects.
totally, it makes, and Megan and I have talked about this too. To me, the dealer that does that is intentionally trying to kill someone.
Yeah.
We've had marijuana here in North Carolina laced with fentanyl.
Yes.
I mean,
No-
it's
No question about it. We had my dog. I was telling Lewis. I think we told this story earlier, maybe a different episode, but it always is a good idea to bring it back up. Just 25-year-old, first year law student, never been a druggie, never been a drinker, out with his friends, home on break, and the cocaine pops out. Because that particular crowd. And he had never used it, thought, well, you know what, I might as well, if I'm going to experience life, I should experience life. And it killed him. It killed him. I mean, first time he had ever tried something like that. So it's just so dangerous out there. I mean, it's just so dangerous out there.
A lot different than when I was growing up.
Yeah. Guys, and we talked about this a little bit before coming in, but the one thing, did you guys have to change the way you deliver treatment during the COVID? I mean, with the masking and everything else?
Oh, yeah.
And where are you in that evolution? Is
Yeah.
it starting to, I mean, we did the same thing. We went virtual. That was a huge mistake for us. The mask thing has become, I was telling you guys earlier, you walk into a store now, the person with the mask is looked at like you're weird, nobody's wearing masks. 3 months ago, if you didn't have a mask, people looked at you like, what's your problem? So what did you guys have to do treatment wise?
Well, I mean, early on, it was an immense to overcome what we were going to try to do. We're lucky because we did have a decent sized facility. We shut down part of the treatment program for being able to separate folks. We had one early outbreak where we ended up having to test over 90 people that we knew we had. It actually came from another treatment program and came into us, and we ended up having to sort all that out. It feels like whiplash, to be honest with you. There were times where it felt like it was getting better. Our chief medical officer was a consultant for the Florida Department of Health, so we were getting early indications of what was coming. We were early testers. We got the early Abbott machine, which turned out to be not very valuable anyways. But the intent was to try to stay on the forefront and to get the worst thing that was happening was people who were finally at a point where they were going to reach out for help. We're either testing positive and not being able to access treatment at that time, and that's been about a 1 year process for us. So we've ebbed and flowed. We've really intensified our infection protocols, and then we've scaled them back, and so we're back and forth. I mean, through the whole process, we pretty much stuck to the CDC, and our ability to really test comprehensively allowed us to continue to work. We never shut down.
So you never shut down?
We never shut down. No, we
Wow.
had one period of time where we had to stop the intake of folks. We kept the folks that were flowing,
Already on campus,
coming. But yeah, and now we're to the point where we're actually accepting COVID positive patients into treatment.
Are you really? That's
Wow.
fantastic.
Yeah, that just happened January. So.
Evolution is definitely the right word.
Yeah.
And I think in the beginning, you mentioned there we have 3 business units down in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
We have the Rhodes and Stark Lakeview, but we have a separate detox stabilization program called Stepping Stone. And what that allowed us to do was we usually run 3 medical detox units down there. We shut those down and funneled everyone through that Stepping Stone facility. So we had a dedicated
Which is
building.
off premise to
It
some
is.
degree,
It's down
right?
the street,
Right.
and so physical location separated, quarantine, detox unit, and
Nice.
observation for those days. So if anyone did come in, we didn't catch it within a week, they test positive, they're there. They're not in general population with residential
Nice.
yet. So we had that flexibility, but we've been moving with, and so we've taken some pretty strong measures of
Sure.
repurposing a whole facility for detox and quarantine.
Wow.
That was early on, and we've evolved through it. We were the first facility I knew of to do testing in-house, to test all of our employees, to provide vaccines for our patients, vaccines for our employees and their immediate families. So Dr. Jordan, our Chief Medical Officer, she's been on the forefront. And I remember we were all down at Lakeview at the end of February in 2020 for a meeting. We get home, we all get back to our areas, and come early mid-March, she sounded the horn pretty early on, and we all thought maybe she's overreacting, or and then everything ground to a halt around March 13th.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure she was like,
So in that regard, because I'm sure like us, you had a fall off in census.
We did.
So, but then how quickly did it ramp back up again?
Well,
Yeah,
it's been inconsistent.
Yeah, it's been, and Megan and I were talking about this offline. There's a seasonality to addiction treatment, and since COVID, that has not existed.
Right.
It's been a really weird ride. Our largest inbound intake month was July of 2020, so this is 3 months after COVID hit. So I think what happened was everything ground to a halt. We, individuals, like you said, Lewis, didn't stop using, and as a matter of fact, the isolation and all of the changes in lifestyles increased, depression. There was a perfect storm of conditions that allowed individuals to really entrench their disease, and then we saw that bump back up. August 2020. The second wave, the variant starts hitting, and it's just been a sawtooth since then. So, but
You got 160 beds. Were you ever totally full this time?
No.
Okay, that'd be a lot
No,
of
that's
beds to
yeah,
fill.
Yeah. So I think, and Ryan and I were talking. We just ticked up over 100 census, first time in 18 months.
Wow.
This
Wow,
week.
really?
Yeah.
Well, I hope that people, I hope, unfortunately, the media hasn't been our friend.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are scaring everybody to death. And so everybody's got their own view about we should do this, we should do that. The only thing that it has been, it's been an incredibly destructive period for us because it's the perfect storm. You've got a disease that's creating more need for our services, and then our services were shut down because of all the rules they put in place.
Yeah.
It's just, there was, and I don't think that anybody purposely tried to make this happen, but that's just what happened. The practical, practically speaking, we have made it more difficult for people to get help with this disease. And the disease has, the COVID disease has created more people in our space that need help.
Very much so.
Yeah, I think that early on too. I think that a lot of people who didn't want to go to treatment used the pandemic as an excuse.
Oh,
Absolutely.
gotcha.
And part of my job is to overcome objections and barriers
Correct,
with
yeah.
the patient or family, and that was a big one. And so, but then other people had legitimate concerns for their health of not wanting to get on an airplane. So we pivoted and provided ground transportation from North Carolina to Lakeview for patients for a reasonable cost, that sort of thing. And as we've moved forward, I still see some objections that have to do with COVID, and we've gotten pretty good at navigating just about all those. But what we've seen overall, and this might segue into a big conversation, but it's important, I think, for the people listening to know that the patients that we are seeing, like you said, they're much sicker when they get to us. They wait much longer to seek treatment. Some of them are near death. They have medical conditions that are severe because they should have gone to treatment 6 months ago. And or psychiatric issues, the co-occurring mental health piece that we're seeing, I haven't gotten a call, and I can't remember where it was someone that called and said, hey, I'm just a good old-fashioned alcoholic, and I'm ready to go to treatment. And I'm like, okay, here's, get a flight, and we'll see you tomorrow. No, it's not working like that. I'm working with patients and families for weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
To get them ready, willing to go to treatment, prepped to go, and that sort of thing. And it's just, I was kind of venting to Eric. I was like, everyone is just, all these patients are so acute, and which is a scary thing because people are sicker, people are struggling more. they're waiting longer to seek treatment. That's not a good recipe.
No question. I think that all of us that work in the space, we've had to put on the hat of educator. I mean, that's really, Lewis and I talk about it all the time. We spend most of our time trying to explain to people what to do. You know, we still do we have our conversations with the alcoholics and addicts and get into our story, and we start talking about how to stop drinking. But educating the families about how they can navigate, because they're lost. They just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that we decided to bring the podcast back, is that we can tell people, you know what, if you don't know what to do, call us, email us, and we will at least give you an overview of the space, how it works.
Yeah.
And then everybody, people, based on age, based on problem, based on co-occurring disorder, there are different places that we always think this would be a good fit, this would be a good fit. And then there's always the cost, there's the insurance. There's a lot of different boxes to check to actually get somebody in treatment, getting ready to get some help. And so I'm glad you guys were able to come in and talk about it.
One of the areas I was going to bring up, the pub,
Yeah.
which fascinated me with the explanation last night, which, as Macon brought up, we have several people who will come to us and go, can I just find a comfortable way to drink or do drugs? And the answer is, yeah, you probably could, but the fact that you and I are having this conversation is probably a good indication that it's not going to happen. But you're deluding yourself, so I like what you guys have done. If you would explain the concept behind this pub thing, because I was that guy who said, I'm not going to have any more fun. How am I'm in the business I was in before this, I owned an advertising agency. My job, as was Macon's, was to entertain clients.
Oh yeah, we were paid to drink. I was telling Lewis, if the guy I worked for, if he got my American Express bill and it wasn't, if it didn't have a lot of charges from certain kind of places, he called me and said, "What are you doing?
Right.
Get back out there, please."
Mm-hmm.
And so we were rewarded, quite honestly, from drinking, and of course they didn't have any idea about the other stuff that's going on. But Lewis is right. And
to me, what they've developed is a great way to segue, which I've never heard put that way before. So why don't you kind of fill them in, guys, about the is it called the pub?
No, it's called the Bistro.
The Bistro, okay, I'm sorry.
And it's one of my favorite spaces at Lakeview too. And the intention behind it, so it's kind of a dark decor, high top tables, bar stools, big screen TVs on the wall. It does resemble a sports bar. One of the things when we were redesigning the campus at Lakeview is we took into account what patients were saying and what a lot of the male patients were saying. Will I ever be able to go to a sporting event or watch a game with my buddies or do this or that again? And the answer is yes, you can do those things sober. So we intentionally built this space to resemble that atmosphere. It's a little bit of exposure therapy. For them to spend some time there with each other, realize that they can be in a space like that. They can watch sporting events. We can bring in chicken wings and all pizza and things, and kind of recreate that atmosphere. And they're like, oh wow, I just had fun and I didn't drink in this space and at this time, and that gives them a little bit of hope for what they can do. But yeah, some people walk in, they're like, this looks like a bar, and I'm like,
I like that kind of, and I heard it last night, the exposure therapy.
Yes.
And if they are triggered, then hey, they're in inpatient treatment with us. We process that in
What a
group.
great way to
they're still safe.
Yes.
Because if they get out and they're like, let me try to go to a bar and watch a game and not have a drink, and they can do that without
Good luck.
support. Yeah, good luck.
I really like that.
Yes, maybe we should do that here, Lewis.
Well, I will tell you this. What we tell people is it's very easy to relapse in our program. It is. You're living at home. You're working. You come to us 3 to 4 days a week, sometimes 5, but it's only for a brief period of time. And the rest of the time, you're out there where all the danger zones are. And in fact, the closest retail space to us, if you walk out our front door and take a left, is a convenience store down there that sells beer and wine. You go a few more feet, you go to another store that sells beer and wine. You're surrounded by it. Our goal as folks in recovery is to learn to live in their world, not vice versa. Because their world's going to be, it's going to be open forever. And the 85% of the population, or whatever it is, that can actually drink and do drugs responsibly, because drugs and alcohol, Megan's pointed this out to me on multiple occasions, at some level are good. Alcohol is a nice way to socially interact with people, and people do it all the time. Folks like me, though, can't do that Because one, I will never be able to drink a drink. It just won't happen. It turns into, or if it's one drink, it's this big, right? It's a trash can size filled with everything. So we've got to learn to live in the world. So after I got sober, and I would still entertain folks, I just was the only one that could actually function in the middle of the night and know what was going on.
Yeah.
But I love that, the bistro concept. That was pretty
Yeah,
cool.
that's brilliant.
But
Well, I think that the part of being intentional about what we were trying to accomplish, that's the guy, on the guy side. On the women's side, it's, more or less, forcing individuals into group circumstances, minimizing isolation. And it's not just with where they eat, it's where they get ready. It's in the way that Ryan talks about, in the way that the decor is, we pipe in certain scents, calming scents. And so it's incredible, the details of the program. I mean, it's built on, a clinical model.
Sure.
But the details of the program show, the thought process that went through and what we wanted to try to accomplish and what we thought was good treatment.
So we don't want to admit the females, but on the female side, you actually have a spa.
Yeah, yeah.
It's part of it because,
Yeah.
and I like that the way that the executive is her title
Executive director, yeah.
I like the way she described it. It's they come in and they've taken so poor care of themselves up to that point. Particularly females, they want to feel like they're human again,
Yeah.
and so you bring them in and let them do their hair.
Yeah, hair. We bring in someone who can do manicures and pedicures
Right.
for the
That's
patients,
awesome.
that sort of thing. And it's to practice self-care, but it's also to bring them together too. A lot of women come into treatment and they haven't always had the best relationships with other women. And so
Yeah.
just healing that, it's like in our women's dining space, there are large communal tables that force them to come and break bread together and sit at the table
Right.
and conversate and that sort of thing. So, and it all goes back to that gender responsive treatment model of, and I've seen this, I firmly believe in it. There are different circumstances that lead men and women usually to substance abuse. There are different traumas and co-occurring conditions that men and women experience during addiction. Physiological, men and women detox differently. Physical, mentally, they're going to return. There's different family system dynamics they're returning to. So there's a whole different set of challenges that led to addiction, happened during addiction, and that they're going to step into after treatment. And we try to address all of those down to the little details of the physical environment, even the scents in the building and how they smell and how they feel and look, how the spaces are used,
Well,
based on who is using them.
You guys, if you've heard this from me before, but you guys do the best job with the least amount of geography I've ever seen. I mean, it's not like it's small.
Yeah.
It's a large, but you've got all of this compacted into a fairly, I mean, there's no wasted space. And you're right there on the canal or there's a waterway.
It's a lake.
It's a lake,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
all right. But and the setting couldn't be nicer. But you're utilizing everything at your disposal very well, I believe.
That entire campus, the footprint is, there's a ton of square footage on a relatively small
Yes.
piece of land.
So how long has it been there? How long? Give me a history of
Well,
the
it's
facility.
so the organization started down in Deerfield Beach, Florida, when it was privately held, and there was a period of time where the original owners were gonna step away, and a private equity firm came in and they moved up to Jacksonville. That's where we still do a fair amount of work down in Deerfield. I mean, administration's down there, accounting's down there, finance, and the physical campus then became the starting point. And they bought a fair amount of land, but they only had one facility located on it, and it's been that evolution. So you start, you have a capital expenditure, and you have new owners come in, and then this is what's trending and what we believe works, and we do a ton of analytics. So what is good quality outcomes? What do we need to do to get to those outcomes? And so this idea of separating the genders, and then putting this 10,000 square foot gym on campus, and then this concept of detox and stabilization for shorter term treatments. It's just been one thing after another. The nice part about it is there are still a core group of people, Jamie included, who was there from the very beginning.
Right.
Right. And so it's
Yeah.
a little over 20 years. Ryan's got it, the 20-year logo on, and I mean, it's been a fixture. So, but not, adding additional programming, looking at, it's difficult to treat professionals in in that environment. They have certain requirements that mandate a certain amount of, attention,
Right.
which turns into, you need additional counselors, you need additional medical staff. And so being able to grow it at a clip that's consistent and allows us to back up and fund, or get a revenue stream for those capital expenditures has taken,
Sure.
10 years.
Oh, yeah.
So
Cool.
yeah, it's pretty.
Well,
it's pretty
one
neat.
of the things we'll definitely do, we'll get Terry to put a link to you guys
Yeah.
from this podcast, as well as on our Recovery Boys site. So if you guys want to take a look at what we're talking about, it'll be easy to do.
Well, and also on their website, there is a 7+ minute video that I think would do you worlds of good if you
Yeah.
watched it, to kind of give you an idea of it goes into all the things we've been talking about today, give you an idea of the sense of and plus the culture, which really sets the tone for how the treatment
Yeah,
is.
right.
That's the key to this whole thing, and
Right.
you'll get that if you watch the video.
Yeah, for sure.
It's one thing for the four of us sit here and talk about it, but you can actually see it in action.
Yeah.
And it really does. It goes to, again, I come from North Carolina, which we have so few options like you guys have in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
And I've also often said this. I think with all that competition you've got down there, you guys are going to make your product better just to survive. And that's what we've found out. In order to make this place survive, we have to make ourselves better.
Yeah.
And partnering with folks like you guys necessarily, and I learned this term when I was in the advertising business, being partnered with you guys gives us an implied endorsement that you guys trust us enough to be on camera like this and to come and host an event last night, and that we, vice versa, that we would ask you to do that, because there are tons of facilities out there that we wouldn't say that about.
Right.
But we've got to be careful because it's our reputations.
Yeah.
right, exactly right.
So
Louis, anything else you can think of?
I'm probably, once we turn this off, with probably a dozen other questions we ask. But
Well, that's all right. We enjoy doing these podcasts, and it's so nice to have you guys come in and talk about your facility. If you have any questions, you can always email us, and we'll pass the emails on to these guys if you have some specific questions about how they do things. And the most important thing, and we say this all the time, the most important thing is if you need some help, go and get it.
Yeah, right.
That's the most important thing. And there is information out there, good information these days. Unfortunately, there's still a fair amount of bad actors in this space. We run into them. I just ran into them a couple weeks ago, and it's just amazing what some people will do for money. And so finding good actors is really important for us. And Louis, what else? Anything else?
no, but just, again, I want to thank Eric Rhodes and Ryan Mitchner with Lakeview Health for coming on and making our job easier.
Yeah, that's right.
Or
it's-
less stressful.
Well, and you know what it does? It makes us more resourceful to have
Yes.
partners like this, because we don't do what they do.
No.
And a lot of the people who come and see us need what they do.
Very much
And
so.
so it makes us more comfortable when we can matter-of-factly say, we know exactly what you need, we know exactly where to send you, and then we can make that happen. That's really important to us, and so that works out good. Next week, we will bring in a powerhouse, I think, in this area.
Well, and a friend of these guys, too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Jeff George will be our guest next week.
Yeah, and Jeff is just amazing. The work he's done. We've been over there. We've sat
his
down
wife,
with him.
Becky.
And his wife Becky.
Yeah.
They've done a tremendous. They have really dedicated their life to helping people.
Very much so.
And so we'll have him in next week, and we'll look forward to that conversation. If you have any questions, always send them to us, and we'll get to them as fast as we can. Louis,
Yes, sir.
it's nice being with you again
Well,
today.
and-
Thank you guys for
and
coming in.
who are you?
My name's Macon.
And I'm Louis.
And we're the
Recovery Boys.
Thanks, everybody. Go to therecoveryboys.com. This show will be posted quickly. Terry, our crack team here, will make sure that it's out. Terry's amazing. And we will see you again next week on the Recovery Boys. Louis?
Thank you, Macon.
Thank you, Lewis.
I will
And
see
Will,
you
thank
next
you, buddy.
week.
All right, thanks
Good
so
night,
much.
guys. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Mama, take this badge from me, 'cause I can use it